Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a very rich debate already, and I know it's going to continue. And I want to really say that a few years ago, as chairman of the External Affairs Committee of Parliament, I had said there is no such thing as a Congress foreign policy or a BJP foreign policy. There is only Indian foreign policy and India's national interests. And I will say to you today that I think all the speakers, even those who have been critical of the government and who will be critical about some aspects, have spoken in that spirit of one nation, one set of national interests, and a very strong commitment to what is being done for India and Indians in this challenging situation. And I do want to assure my friend, the Foreign Minister, that we have all been watching with very close attention and admiration the adroit diplomacy he's been conducting, and at the same time with some concern about some of the areas on which we may have a slight difference of emphasis. Let me say, so having said that I'd like to address these remarks and the issues facing us under three broad headings, and I'll be fairly brief on each of them. One is the humanitarian situation and the evacuation. The second is our stand at the United Nations. And the third is the geopolitical implications of this crisis for all of us. Now, if we look at the humanitarian situation and the evacuation, I think there is no doubt that we are all incredibly grateful for the success of Operation Ganga and the return of some 23,000 Indians, mainly medical students, back home to India. And on that, I don't believe that there is any particular demurral. But it is to be pointed out that while we commend the embassy for having begun to register the students in Ukraine early in the process, it is also true that some other embassies were quicker off the mark in getting people out. And I think there's no harm in admitting this. This did happen. The fact that we registered the students was useful. But we did not, for example, have enough domestic transport arrangements in Ukraine. A lot of the students had to walk very, very long distances to get to the border points eventually. And that is something we'll have to bear in mind for future situations. So if we were to look at the positive side of the ledger, the government was very quick to make excellent arrangements in the neighboring countries, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, in order to fly our people out once they had got there. But in getting them to those countries, I'm afraid we were perhaps somewhat found lacking. And I'm not trying to diminish in any way the contributions of our excellent diplomats, our hardworking personnel. The minister was kind enough to hold a consultative meeting of the External Affairs Ministry, a consultative committee meeting, in which he took us into these young diplomats working 24/7, manning the hotline in order to receive calls from students. All of that was very important. But one set of complaints that many students have expressed, including to me personally, have been the difficulties they encountered in getting to the border points where they had to cross. And I think this is a lesson that we need to bear in mind for the future. And of course, we must all pay tribute to Naveen Shankarappa, whose life was so needlessly and tragically lost when he went out heroically to get food for other Indians who were sheltering in a bunker with him. And that, I think, is indeed something we must absolutely, in this House, unanimously pay tribute for. His parents were gracious enough, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair, when you were speaking, to donate his body to medical research. But there's also, I think, some research we need to do on how these situations got to the stage they did, where we found ourselves with so many people there. I will add that one thing that's a bit unseemly, unfortunately, was the publicity mongering that we conducted in some of the neighboring countries. I got some adverse comments on that. I think it was unnecessary. Our nation would have risen in gratitude, and we don't really need publicity in foreign countries for what we're doing for our own people. That was unfortunate and should have been discouraged. Hey, you know what I'm talking about. But let's move on, Shaukat. But I do want to mention one more good thing, which I think has not been mentioned by some of the speakers, and that is the timely and appropriate humanitarian aid that India has sent to Ukraine. That was good. I congratulate the government for having taken that initiative. I think we sent something like 90 tons of relief material, no small amount, and that was essential for a country that is going through the hell that the people of Ukraine are suffering. So broadly speaking, those are some of the concerns that one has in mind. I think it is to be said, however, that there were a couple of unfortunate statements made by people associated with the ruling party during the travails of our people when all of us were getting desperate messages from families and from students. There was one minister, the former chief minister of the ruling party, saying that the students had to be blamed for miscalculating the gravity of their situation, quote unquote. Most unfortunate. We had another minister serving in this government saying that these are merely people who couldn't pass the NEET examinations in this country. Such statements were most unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to say to the government they were also unnecessary. When people are going through terrible trauma, it was a time for all of us to rally together and attend to their needs, as indeed we did eventually. These statements really reflect poorly on the commitment of our nation to our people stuck in distress abroad. Having said all of that, all's well that ends well. The students are back. Now the concern is how do we manage to help them catch up with the education that has been disrupted as a result of this tragic situation, the war and the evacuation. And I think there the government should really do two things. It should take immediate action to see what can be done to have remedial instruction available to these students, ideally in Indian medical colleges. And the second thing they need to do is use the revelation of 23,000 medical students in a country like Ukraine, which even the Prime Minister expressed surprise on, that there were so many there, to realize how badly we need to rethink our approach to medical education. The shortage of government seats. I mean, you realize the NEET is a tough examination. But do you know that of all the children who pass the NEET examinations, only 7% get into colleges in India? They have to go abroad. They have no choice. When COVID happened and we had to evacuate people from various countries, I had medical students from my constituency in the most extraordinary addresses. Places like Moldova, remote corners of China, Kazakhstan, and so on, because, of course, they could not get education. Now, the government really has to use this opportunity to take a root and branch look at establishing an adequate number of government medical institutions. We have heard so many promises over the last 8 years that AIIMS will be introduced in every state. My own state has received that promise from 3 successive health ministers. We're yet to see the foundation stone of an AIIMS being laid in Kerala. Let us now move on a war footing. We need doctors very clearly. We have people capable of studying to be excellent doctors. Let's give them an opportunity to do so affordably. So that, sir, is the first basket of issues, the humanitarian ones. So second, my concern about our stand at the United Nations, which I recognize has evolved in a way that I can today fully support. But I was shocked, I'll say very honestly, at our first couple of statements at the United Nations. As I mentioned to the foreign minister, it was not just the abstention. Abstention, there are good reasons why we wanted to signal a certain position. But the fact that in the initial statements at the United Nations, we failed to mention any of the principles that we have stood for in the world for the last 75 years. We didn't mention the UN Charter. We didn't mention state sovereignty. We didn't mention the inviolability of borders. We didn't mention even the inadmissibility of the use of force when it comes to resolving international disputes. These are basic core principles that go back to Nehruji's Panchsheel and before. And these are things we've always stood for. It took a while, but eventually we've got around to it. And we have in our last few statements done this, even while abstaining in the UN Security Council, in the General Assembly, and in the Human Rights Council. Now, the fact is, we have great respect for strategic autonomy. We want to make our own choices. But our choices can sometimes involve standing up for principles. We need not have behaved as we did in the initial stages of the UN. And what was particularly deplorable was that first statement in which we showed a shameful even-handedness between the aggressor and the victim. We actually merely urged both sides to de-escalate. Now, if somebody is attacking you and you're defending yourself, are you guilty of escalation? How can we use language like that? We said that we call for concerted efforts on all sides to return to the path of diplomatic negotiations and dialogue. Well, one side is being attacked. If you don't want to use harsh language against that side, because in the name of your friendship with them, then I think one has to also ask, if we can't speak frankly to our friends, then what is the friendship worth? I think it's very important that we stand up for the fact that in these matters, we can at least have spoken with a certain amount of moral conviction and courage, even while, if necessary, choosing to abstain. And I understand we have a special, privileged strategic partnership with Russia. It goes back a very long time. I myself, just last month, had inaugurated the celebrations of the, whatever it was, 75th year of Indian-Russian diplomatic relations or whatever. And I had spoken very warmly of our warm relation, of our close relationship. It's not something that anybody on this side of the aisle is going to be criticizing the government for respecting. But at the same time, we have to understand that in this particular instance, it is Russia that resorted to the use of force. It is something we have to understand that though we have a long list of IOUs, most of those IOUs on Kashmir and so on, vetoes in the Security Council are to the Soviet Union, of which Ukraine was also a part. So let's face it, we owe those IOUs to both Russia and Ukraine. And let us also face it, we are indeed a major client for Russian weapons supplies. Our defense systems rely a lot on the weapons we've imported from Russia and on the spare parts we need to service them. But first of all, we pay top dollar for those weapon systems, sir. No one is doing us any favors. The seller needs the buyer as much as the buyer needs the seller. We should not act as if it's always a one-way traffic. Equally, sir, we must understand that when we have a situation like this, when we have, for example, a country that is taking a stand in relation to us, that troubles us and compromises our own relationships and very directly hurts our own people because of the short-term after effects, the rise in oil prices, the rise in commodity prices. We have some seed, even, 70% of the sunflower oil and sunflower seeds that India has comes from Ukraine. That's no longer coming. These are simple examples, but all of this are matters that do affect us, and we should have the right to be able to say to our friends, look, this was not right. This has caused us some pain and difficulty. But finally, I'd say that now our position has been calibrated. Our line has become notably tougher. And I want to stress one thing that I'm sure my friend, the foreign minister, will want to stress also, except that perhaps he will not be able to do so as openly as I can, which is that refusing to condemn Russia is not the same as endorsing what Russia has done. And that, I think, is a reminder for all of us that whatever India may be accused of, we have not at any stage, through any action or any words, implied an endorsement of or a support of what the Russians have done by conducting this invasion of Ukraine. Finally, so the third set of issues will be the geopolitical implications of what we have seen. In the short term, there is some very worrying consequences, sir. I would say that the Ukraine war has exposed, 3 minutes, has exposed India's strategic vulnerabilities in a tough neighborhood as nothing else could have done, and it's raised some fundamental questions for our security. We had been maintaining a relationship with Russia while developing a strategic partnership with the Quad, with the US, Japan, Australia, and India. Suddenly, the 3 Quad members have taken a very different position on Ukraine from what we have. We are somewhat out of sync with them. We have scrambled to keep them on side and to show some understanding of our position. And so far, I commend the diplomatic efforts of our government that we have been able to keep them on side, and they have signaled an understanding of India's position. At the same time, there are some real concerns about the larger implications. We are seeing Russia and China getting more and more close to each other. And if Russia is weakened as a result of this misadventure, which it almost certainly will be, then its weakening can only give China the upper hand in that relationship. A Russia that becomes essentially a subordinate state of China is a major concern to us in India, sir, because we have, as recently as 2 years ago, lost 20 of our Jawans in Ladakh to Chinese aggression. And in these circumstances, the neutralization of Russia, or even Russia coming along with China, is a matter of grave concern to us. And there is the sideshow of the Chinese-Pakistani relationship. Prime Minister Imran Khan was in Moscow the day the attack began on Ukraine, and he went through with his meetings anyway. He continued to do so. What does this mean? Are we witnessing the emergence of a Russia-China-Pakistan axis that we have to think about? Yes. At the same time, sir, there are some opportunities. We've had I think a record number of ministers have visited Delhi in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure the foreign minister was a very busy man receiving all of them. And that's a very good sign, because it suggests that there is an area of opportunity for us. What is that opportunity? It is the opportunity to leverage not only understanding for our position, but also to go beyond our traditional reluctance to choose sides on matters in which, frankly, it is sometimes necessary to take a stand. We cannot sit on the fence all the time, Mr. Chairman, sir. I think it's important that we listen with open ears to these distinguished visitors who've come. We don't have to take any lectures from them. None of them has the right to tell us what we need to do. But at the same time, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we, instead of bromides about the need for diplomacy and negotiations, why don't we try and take a step forward and offer ourselves in a mediating capacity? Why can we not perhaps reach out to both Moscow and Ukraine and see whether this is something the Israelis have been doing, the Turks have been doing? Why not India, which prides itself on a good relationship with both the capitals, try and play a constructive role in this area? So I just want to conclude with a quote from Jawaharlal Nehru way back in 1946. He said, "India, constituted as she is, cannot play a secondary part in the world. She will either count for a great deal or not count at all." I urge our foreign minister and our government, let it not be a case of India not counting at all. Let us count for a great deal. Let us stand for our principles. Let us respect our strategic autonomy. But let us at the same time go forward and try and play a constructive role in bringing about the peace that we have so far given rhetorical support to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tharoor ji. Next, Doctors Farooq Abdullah ji.
Thank you, Mr.